We're letting everybody load into the Zoom app at this moment, so please hold on tight, and we will start the presentation in one moment. ACA Small Business Bootcamp and Resource Collective for this Monday, August 10th, for this special session we have put together. I'm Robert Theobald, the Small Business Ombudsman and Vice President of Small Business Services here at the Arizona Commerce Authority. First, to start out, we want to thank all of our community partners. We could not do these boot camp sessions without them. This is just a small sampling of the 70+ community partners that have been part of our boot camp series. The Small Business Boot Camp and Resource Collective is designed to help small businesses work through the COVID crisis and return stronger than ever. And it's a statewide initiative supported by those community partners. Additionally, the boot camp is going to continue on Tuesdays and Fridays, sorry about that, Tuesdays and Fridays, with some occasional Monday special sessions throughout August. But previously, the boot camp, starting in the beginning of May, a little bit of history. Beginning of May, we started the boot camp series, and it was a daily webinar series daily through the end of July. And all those sessions are on our website. They've been recorded, and the session will be recorded as well. And you can go back and review any of those sessions that we've had. You can also register for the upcoming sessions on our website here, azcommerce.com/small-business-boot-camp/. Additionally, on that website, you can find our resource collective. And this is where we have all of our resources that our community partners have provided, including links to many of the community grants that are out throughout the state. So you can check that out and find all those resources for your business. So this week we have our Monday session, special session, is maximizing your Paycheck Protection Program loan forgiveness. Tomorrow we have the basics of starting a business for all those who are looking to start a side gig or start something new. And Friday we have upping your marketing game, another marketing session to help provide that marketing support for your business. So just quick updates on PPP that we've been doing every day on this. The PPP loan applications ended on August 8th. So no more ability to apply for a PPP loan. That's why we are now focusing on the forgiveness portion. Many of you, when you look at the numbers for Arizona with the 84,000 plus PPP loans for over $8.6 billion, and that was through the end of July. Those loans, we have a lot of people looking for forgiveness, and we are going to focus our PPP sessions going forward on the forgiveness piece. Additionally, some of the programs that the ACA has to support small business throughout the state is our small business services. We can help navigate through the SBDC, SBA, SCORE, local banking contacts, etc. Our workforce division can also help employers look for employees, crosswalk employees, or help with some of the many training programs that are available for businesses. And our Arizona MEP, Manufacturing Extension Partnership, can help work with small to medium-sized businesses to help them work through any of the needs that they have. Additionally, we want to talk just a quick mention for the state's COVID-19 information and resource page, arizonatogether.org. And here's a list of many of the resources that are available on our resource collective. These are guides that can help you work through this period and help give you some guidance and support as you reopen and look for ways to grow and expand. They cover restaurants, retail, salons, construction, safety, etc. So great resources there. Additionally, for just general business information related to COVID-19, you can find that information on our Arizona Business Resources. A lot of information. We keep that updated as often as new information comes out. So today's speaker, we have Amber Cordoba from Prestamos CDFI. She's been a great partner of ours and done a number of our PPP sessions, so we're excited to have her with us. So with this, I'm going to turn the time over to Amber and let her start her presentation.
All right, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us bright and early on a Monday morning here. Today we are going to be talking about the Paycheck Protection Program loan forgiveness and focusing really on how to maximize the forgiveness and make sure you get it right the first time. I saw a question pop up like, what is this geared towards? And it's really geared towards any business that has a PPP. We'll talk about all the requirements for different types of businesses as well, whether you're a solopreneur or you have employees. So just a couple updates. As Robert mentioned, the PPP program did end this Saturday. We do know that Congress is in discussion for a potential for a second round, and this would be specifically for small businesses that can demonstrate 20 to 30% reduction in sales. So again, this is just a conversation. It's not set in stone, but it is something that they're looking at. They're also discussing the idea of blanket forgiveness for all loans under 150,000, which would be absolutely wonderful. So we're hoping to hear more in the coming weeks as they're working through stimulus plans to see if there's any changes to the PPP program. But as of right now, we'll talk today specifically about what the requirements are as of today. As of 8/6, there was 5,158,938 loans, PPP loans, that were issued for $523 billion. So there was some funds left over in this PPP program. Today, we're going to talk about an overview of forgiveness so that everybody has a baseline understanding. And then we'll focus a lot on the forgiveness requirements and the safe harbor rules, and then the record keeping requirements. And then we'll talk a little bit about how to maximize forgiveness by each of the individual expense types that you may be using your PPP loan for. And then we'll go into a live Q&A session where everybody will have the opportunity to ask any questions that you have as well. So just a quick overview of the program. By now, everybody should know that the PPP is a forgivable loan from the SBA if you meet certain requirements. You are going to apply for forgiveness directly from your PPP lender. So that's going to be whoever you got your PPP loan through, and they're going to have their unique process. Each individual lender will have a specific way that they'll do their forgiveness. Some you can fill out the application that's provided by the SBA, but I would think that the majority are going to require you to go through an online portal to provide all of your information, probably very similar to how you applied in the first place. Your loan term is going to start the day that the PPP funds were deposited into your bank account. So that's day one of your loan term. And one of the nice things is whether you are somebody that has an 8-week term because you got your loan prior to June 5th, or 24-week term, once you've used your funds, you can apply for forgiveness. You don't have to wait until the end of your 8 or 24-week term. You do need to apply for forgiveness within 10 months from the end of your loan term. So that's a pretty long time. You don't have to rush to apply for forgiveness. You want to make sure you're getting all your documentation together so that when you upload, everything is nice and complete. But also would recommend not waiting in the whole 10 months because you might forget about it, and then there's not going to be any forgiveness if you miss the deadline to apply for forgiveness. So you want to make sure that you do get your application in. And then once you submit your application for forgiveness, your lender has 60 days to provide an answer on forgiveness, and then they'll submit to the SBA, and the SBA has an additional 90 days to come back and say, we are accepting this, and they basically pay off your loan on your behalf. Or they could potentially come back and say, we're not forgiving this portion because X, Y, and Z, at which point you would have the opportunity to appeal. If you do have some portion of your loan that's not going to be forgiven, it will turn into a term loan. Any loans that were funded prior to June 5th of this year will be a 2-year term with a 1% interest rate, and you'll have a 6-month deferral period, so you won't have to pay your payments for 6 months. If you were funded after June 5th, you'll have a 5-year term with a 1% and a 10-month deferral. You can talk to your lender about extending it out to the 5 years if you were under the 2-year term, but you do both have to agree to that, and your lender is not required to extend it out. So this could be that you weren't able to use all of your funds, so you can either pay them back right away, or you can pay them back over time, or perhaps you had some employees that you didn't bring back on that you were supposed to bring back on. So there's a portion of your PPP loan that you're not eligible for forgiveness on, and you might have to pay that back. But we're going to talk about the different ways that you can strategize around to maximize your forgiveness today. So in order to get your forgiveness, you need to use 60% for your W2 payroll if you have W2 employees, and we'll talk about self-employed in a minute. But payroll expenses are going to be considered anything that you pay to a W2 employee. That's an employee that you get all of their tax documentation and you have taxes withheld from their payroll each time, and you submit them a W2 at the end of the year. We're not talking about 1099 contractors. 1099 contractors are not eligible use of the proceeds of this fund. And you can pay based on the first $100,000 in compensation per employee, and your employee must have a principal residence within the United States. Payroll expenses are going to be considered any kind of salary, hourly wages, commissions, cash tips, or any kind of equivalent to that, any payments for sick time, paid time off, for any kind of leave. So really any kind of payment that you're making to your W2 employees is going to be considered as part of their wages. Separate of their wages, you can also use the PPP funds for employee benefits. So this would be your group health care or any kind of retirement plans that you might have. And then you can also use the PPP funds and get forgiveness for payment of state and local taxes, but this is the unemployment insurance only. It doesn't count for any kind of workers' compensation or any other types of state or taxes that you might have. It also doesn't include the employer portion of the Social Security and Medicare. So that portion that you pay of those FICA taxes on your employees' compensation, that is not something you can use the funds for, and it won't be forgiven, but their gross wages will. And then for those that are self-employed and use a Schedule C in order to get access to the PPP program, you are going to have access to owner compensation replacement. If you had an 8-week term, it's limited to 8/52 of your 2019 Schedule C line 31, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. If you're opting for the 24-week term, or you were funded after June 5th, 2020, then it'll be 2.5 times your monthly net profit, which is typically how they determine your PPP loan in the first place. So you should be eligible to use 100% for that owner compensation replacement. You're also still eligible to use it for other things such as rent or lease and utilities, which we'll talk about now. So in order for you to use a rent, lease, or any kind of utilities, they needed to be under contract prior to February 15th, 2020. So you would need to have already had your lease in place, or your internet in place, or your cell phone in place. And then in terms of the lease agreement, anything that's included in your lease, so any kind of rent, sales tax, any of those common area or triple net type charges, those are all built into your lease, and those are all eligible expenses that are forgivable. Remember that other expenses outside of payroll are capped at 40% in order to maintain full forgiveness. And this isn't an all or nothing. So if you were to use a little bit more of your PPP funds on other eligible expenses and not payroll, you'd still get some level of forgiveness. It would just be less than full forgiveness if you didn't hit that 60% payroll mark. The other types of items that you can use the PPP loan proceeds are utilities, which are going to be water and sewer, electricity, telephone, including your cell phone, internet, gas and propane, and transportation. And then you can also pay the interest portion for any kind of mortgages or fixed loans. So we're talking if you have an existing SBA loan, if you have an equipment loan, even if you have an auto loan, you can pay just the interest portion. You cannot use it for the monthly payment though. So you want to make sure that you're only paying that interest portion. If you have a mortgage, maybe you own your commercial property, this can be really beneficial because typically there's a lot of interest on the mortgage portion. So if you were one of the people that applied for an EIDL while that program was still open and you received that $1,000 per employee EIDL advance, the EIDL advances will be subtracted from your PPP loan forgiveness amount and will have to be paid back. You also cannot pay 1099 contractors, as I mentioned. So contractor, a lot of times there's some confusion around what an employee is, what a contractor is, and sometimes people consider contractors their employees. But if you're not paying them W-2 wages, where you're withholding taxes and giving them a W-2 at the end of the year, then those are not considered employees and they're not eligible as a use of these funds or forgivable. Other things that are also not considered utilities that have come up as questions over time are around janitorial or cleaning services, pest control, grease trap removal, HOA, insurance cost, IT services. None of those are considered utilities. I will say the one thing that you want to look out for, though, is if part of your lease that janitorial or pest control or association fees are included in your lease, then that would be eligible, because anything that's included in your lease is an eligible expense. But if they're paid out separately through a separate contract, or not. Another big question that comes up is around a home office. So your home office can be considered as an eligible use if you have a separate area that you use just for business. So, you know, if you're using your kitchen table and, you know, you clean your laptop off at the end of the day and have dinner with your family, A, good for you, but B, that's not a dedicated area. But if you do have a home office or a specific area within your home that you use just for business purposes, then you can use this as an eligible expense. You just need to prorate it based on the percentage of the space. So for example, if you are in a 100 square foot office and your home is 1,000 square feet, that's 10%. You would take all of the utilities, your lease payment or your mortgage payment that's eligible, the eligible portion, and then multiply it by 10% in order to get the amount that you're eligible to use. For most people, it's not going to come up as a very large amount, but if you're working to try to, you know, get as much as possible, then you might want to do that. You are not required to have used a home office deduction on your 2019 taxes in order to be eligible for the home office deduction, but you must be able to claim it on your taxes. So basically, you just have to be eligible to have claimed your home office, and that's basically if you have a dedicated area that you're using for business. And then any of these expenses that are claimed for forgiveness under the PPP cannot be claimed on your 2020 taxes. So that's something that you might want to talk with your accountant or tax preparer about to strategize around. You also don't have to claim your PPP loan or the forgiveness portion as income. So you won't use the income on your taxes. You also won't use the expenses. So just something to be cognizant of as you're looking at your strategic planning for tax purposes. And then another question that's come up a lot is around, can I pay my employees a bonus or a hazard pay? They're out there on the front line, or I want to increase their pay in order to keep them, because a lot of people are experiencing trouble keeping employees because of unemployment right now, or people feeling unsafe. You are able to increase to whatever amount you want, as long as it doesn't exceed the equivalent of $100,000 per year. So in the 8-week term, that would be a max of $15,385. And if you're doing the 24-week term, you can't pay an employee more than $46,154 per employee. There's a couple of safe harbor rules that are also really helpful, because there's some rules around keeping the same equivalent of your FTE, your full-time equivalent. So you need to keep the same number of employees that you've had in previous periods. And you also need to make sure that the wages that you're paying to your employees are at least 75% of what they made in the prior quarter. So if you are unable, if you had to lay off people and you get the PPP and you're able to bring them back, if you are unable to rehire those individuals, and you're unable to hire similarly qualified individuals, then that won't impact your eligibility for forgiveness. So if you do offer someone a job to come back and work for you and they decline your offer, you want to make sure that you've given a written offer that says, I would like you to come back, I will give you the same amount of hours, and I will give you the same amount of pay, or whatever the pay is, and give it to them in writing. And ultimately, you would like to have them in writing reject your offer. But if you can't, then You want to show that you did make a good faith effort to bring them back. So if you have text messages, if you had a phone call with them, make a notes and a documentation, and you want to keep all of that because you're going to need to prove that you did your due diligence and a good faith offer to bring those employees back in order to maximize your forgiveness amount. You're also required to notify DES, the unemployment division, if any employee rejects an offer to come back. This is because each week when you're applying for unemployment, you're supposed to indicate whether or not you've actively been looking for work and if you've had any job offers. And if you offer to bring someone back and they reject your offer, well, that's an offer for employment that they've rejected, and it will impact their unemployment benefits. There's also a compliance safe harbor that also helps so that you don't have to bring your full-time equivalency back up. If that's if you're unable to return to the same level of business. And this could be because our government has required restaurants to operate at only 50%, and you're unable to work at full capacity, so you don't need your full staff, or gyms that have been shut down completely. Obviously, you're not able to bring your employees back because you're not able to be open. And basically, if you're unable to operate at the same level of business activity, and that's probably going to cover a good majority of businesses because we've all been impacted by COVID-19, whether it's our our customers aren't coming into our small business, or people aren't able to use our services. So record keeping and applying for forgiveness. So some best practices, and these are really going to be very important. I've been working for our organization to do forgiveness the last couple weeks, and I'm starting to see some trends and really get some fine lines on what we need our borrowers to provide in order to establish forgiveness. So I'm going to talk a lot around that experience. Some of the best practices is if you can establish a second bank account to keep all of your transactions completely separate, that's going to make your record keeping very easy. It's not a requirement, it's just a recommendation. I also recommend that you keep a file with copies of your leases, utility contracts, all of your payroll records, invoices, copies of checks, any other backup data that you have. You can make a new folder on your desktop on your computer, or if you're somebody that likes to print and have those documents in an actual physical file folder. My biggest advice for anybody is start documenting from day one, so that when you go to apply for loan forgiveness at whatever period, you're not trying to find all that information. And it does really help if you have that bank account, because everything's flowing through. It's really easy to keep track. Now, if you are self-employed and you're going to take that owner compensation replacement, I recommend that you take a draw. You can do a weekly draw, you can do a monthly draw, whatever is consistent with how you've paid yourself in the past. You can write yourself a check and cash it, or you can do a bank transfer depending on your bank's capabilities, and just make a memo in the check that says it's, you know, a draw for August or a draw for week of. And you should be able to do the same thing when you transfer from one bank account to another, just, you know, your owner compensation for August. Again, you want to work with your lender to apply for forgiveness within 10 months of the end of your individual loan term. And you do have to work with your lender. You can't ask for forgiveness through another lender. Have been asked that question. And you want to make sure that you're completely prepared to provide all the documentation requested. I know a lot of small businesses have had a lot of trouble working with the larger banks because you submit everything, you may not hear back for a couple weeks or a month, and then all of a sudden you have a deposit in your account. So I would imagine that the forgiveness process is going to be a little bit challenging with the larger banks as well. You're not going to have someone to work with you one-on-one. So you want to make sure that you really get it right the first time. You give all those documentation so that you have all of the backup on how you spent every single cent of your PPP loan. And then we already talked about this, but lenders have 60 days to make a determination. So once you submit your PPP forgiveness application, your lender will have up to 60 days. And I would imagine that it's going to take, you know, at least 45 days for most lenders to be able to get to your application. I'm sure they'll all do it first come, first serve. That's how we do it. We're working our way through, and it really just depends on how many people on any given day are applying for loan forgiveness. But I wouldn't call and ask your lender where you're at in the process, because they'll probably tell you they have 60 days and they'll probably use almost the whole 60 days. And then after that 60 days, again, the SBA has 90 days to make the final determination and pay off the loan on your behalf if you're eligible for the forgiveness. Okay, so again, you may only get one shot at giving all your forgiveness documents, so you want to make sure that you're providing full documentation, again, on how every cent is spent. So for those that are self-employed, sole proprietors that use their Schedule C, that don't have W2 employees, it's just your owner compensation replacement. There's two different loan terms that you're eligible for depending on when your loan was funded. So if your loan was funded prior to June 5th, 2020, you have the option of taking the 8-week term or the 24-week term. You would request that of your lender if you have that option. What we do is when you start your loan application for forgiveness, you just select whether it's the 8 or 24 week. It's pretty easy through our system. It's also a part of the application if you fill out the application. So if you take the 8-week term, you're only eligible for 8/52 of line 31 on your Schedule C, or a maximum of $15,385. So you're not eligible to use 100% of your PPP loan to pay yourself your draws. In order to maximize that and make sure that you can get full forgiveness, you would just want to elect the 24-week term, and there's no disadvantage to taking the 24-week term, at least that I'm aware of, because if you have a 24-week term, you're automatically eligible to use 2.5 times your average monthly net profit from 2019, which is how they would have determined what your PPP loan was in the first place. And again, your wages are still capped at that $100,000 mark. So if you had over $100,000 in profit for 2019, that's awesome for you. You're still only eligible for a maximum of $20,833 for the year for the PPP loan and the forgiveness. Now, if you are somebody that's a sole proprietor and maybe you have an office and you pay a lease, you pay utilities, and those will get you to 100%, then you can go ahead and do that. But there are a lot of people that are self-employed that don't have a home office, or don't have an office, don't really have a home office, and don't have any utilities. So it just makes more sense for you to opt for the 24-week term, just to make sure that you can get that full 100% forgiveness on your owner compensation replacement. When you go to apply for forgiveness, I recommend that you provide a copy of the Schedule C that was filed with the IRS. A lot of people did a draft version of their Schedule C, and that's what they submitted, especially those that were back in May or June prior to the July 15th deadline for taxes this year. So you want to make sure you provide an actual copy of the Schedule C that you filed with the IRS with your taxes. This should also match the Schedule C that you used to apply for the PPP. So if you made any changes to your Schedule C in between the time you applied for the PPP and what you filed with the IRS, just be prepared that there might be some ramifications for that from the IRS, because from what we're hearing, they will check. There will be some kind of cross-check system between the IRS and the SBA at some point to reconcile. So this would be if you did your draft report, and then later on you realized you had some extra expenses, maybe you didn't include mileage, and then all of a sudden your net income is significantly lower than what it was when you applied for your PPP. You are getting more for your PPP loan than what you were actually eligible for. So there could be an issue there. Again, I recommend that you pay yourself in weekly or monthly draws, and that you do it through a check or a bank transfer where you make a nice, easy notation. You'll want to provide a copy of all of your canceled or cash checks. Some of the banks will allow you to print out a copy of a check that's gone through the system. And I would always provide a bank statement to your lender as well. If you can, highlight it and make a note of exactly what it is, and it's just the justification for how you spent the funds. And this isn't because your bank doesn't trust you, it's because the bank is required to do its due diligence to ensure that you actually spend the funds the way that the funds were supposed to be spent. And remember that if you are self-employed, a sole proprietor, your healthcare and retirement expenses are not an eligible use because you are self-employed. So you cannot use healthcare or any kind of retirement contributions as part of your forgiveness application. Now, if you're a corporation, LLC, partnership, any small business that has W2 payroll where you're paying your employees, first remember that you want to use at least 60% in order to maximize your forgiveness. Now, the interesting thing about this is that the PPP was based on 2.5 months, which is 8 weeks or 12 weeks or 10 weeks. The 24-week period is much longer than that. So most businesses, unless you're unable to bring back employees altogether, should be able to pretty easily use their whole PPP loan for payroll. Now, you are eligible to use up to 100% for payroll. It just needs to be at least 60%. You're going to want to provide detailed payroll reports with the per employee data for your full loan term. A lot of payroll companies, I know that Gusto and ADP, a lot of the major payroll providers will actually provide you a report that you can upload and provide for your forgiveness application. And that's really helpful because it breaks down everything that's needed in order to verify that each employee either matches to what your previous period does, that your FTE equivalents are there, and that you've paid at least 75% of the prior wages. So it's a really easy way is just to get a really detailed report from your payroll provider, and you can also print those reports out of QuickBooks as well. Remember that only the gross wages and state unemployment count towards payroll. So your employees' gross wages, whatever the total amount that you pay them is, if you pay them, $1,500 every 2 weeks, that full $1,500 is eligible as part of payroll, but the employer taxes that you pay on top of that are not eligible. And you can also include your unemployment that you pay on the employee's behalf, not federal, only state. You want to provide invoices and copies of any checks or ACHs for healthcare and retirement. So what I recommend that you do is provide an invoice or a detailed ledger from the retirement or healthcare provider. So if you're using Blue Cross Blue Shield, United Healthcare, whoever you're using, you want to provide a detailed report showing that it's the employer portion. So it's the portion that you've paid on behalf of your employees. And then you also want to provide a copy of the canceled check or your bank statement proving that you actually paid those bills. So that level of detail really is required, and I know it's a little bit inconvenient, but also remember that it could impact your forgiveness. So you want to make sure that you're just providing all the detail and really just be prepared to share your bank statement, and any notes that you can put on there is really, really helpful. And then if you have an employee that's no longer with you, you want to make sure that you've kept all of your letters showing that you made a good faith effort to bring them back. If they reject your offer for employment, you want to make sure that you have that as well. If they sent you an email, if they sent you a text message, any documentation on a phone call that you might have had, or you can keep notes that you sent out the letter, you tried calling them, and they were just completely unresponsive. So the more documentation you have, the better. And then if you need to let go of somebody for cause or somebody quits, then that's perfectly fine. You just need to document that. And I would also recommend that you do an exit interview if you can and get a signature that outlines why they were terminated, just so you have it for your records and you can justify why you don't have that FTE anymore. So I've been talking about the FTE headcount, and this can be a little bit confusing topic. So we'll go through it in a little bit more detail here. So the FTE is your full-time equivalent, and that's the total average of all of your employees to equal what the full-time equivalency is. So say you have 5 part-time employees, what you would want to do is add up the total hours for all of those part-time employees and divide it by 40, because 40 hours a week is full-time. And that's what the SBA is using to determine the FTE. In the past, they've used 30 hours, but for this, they're using 40 hours. So you'll take all of your part-time employees, you'll add up all of their hours, divide it by 40, and then you can add any other full-time employees that you have, and that's your full-time equivalent, your FTE. And you can look at 2 different periods to compare against. You can look at February 15th, 2019 to June 30th, 2019, or you can use data from this year from January 1st to February 29th. You want to look at your FTE in both of those periods, and then you want to compare what you have during your PPP loan period, your loan term, against those 2 numbers. And you want to be equal to or more during your PPP term than either of those 2 periods. So you want to show that you've kept the same number of FTE or that you have more than what you had in either of those 2 look back periods. I know that that's a little bit of a confusing topic, so I'll put my information, or I can answer questions, but I can put my information, and feel free to shoot me an email and I can help walk you through a little bit more if anybody needs any more detail on that. You also want to, again, maintain the hourly or salary of at least 75% of the previous quarter. So you want to look back to what you did the previous quarter and make sure you're paying your employees 75% of what they made in that previous quarter. Some people had to reduce pay, and that's fine as long as it doesn't exceed 25%. And if you do offer an employee their job back and they refuse, in order to get the safe harbor, you are required to notify Arizona DES Unemployment Office in writing that they've rejected that offer. I've included here the address and the fax number. I believe this presentation should be available shortly after we finish up today if you haven't had time to write this down. You can also go to the unemployment website, and it's just the general correspondence. And then just keep record that you mailed it off so that you have it for your documentation purposes. For non-payroll expenses, remember that these should not exceed 40% of your total PPP amount. You're going to want to provide copies of invoices or any kind of billing statements. So, you know, if you have APS or SRP, that bill you get each month, you want to provide that. If you have Cox or CenturyLink, you want to provide that. If you have a phone bill, you want to provide the bill. And then you also want to provide a copy of a cleared check. Or if you automatically have it withdrawn from your bank account, you want to make sure you provide your bank account that shows that the withdrawal actually went through. This is to prevent businesses from saying, you know, I spent my money on all these things, but then there's no justification of it. And that's really what you need in order to provide adequate documentation to maximize the forgiveness. You also want to be prepared to provide any copies of lease agreements or any of your fixed loans if you're using your interest. It's better to provide that documentation up front. I've had several people that have uploaded their leases to prove that they were in effect prior to February 15th, and that just buttons up everything really nicely. I see you wrote the check was cashed. I can corroborate that with the bank statement, and here's the lease proving that you were in effect prior to February 15th. Same thing with the payroll. You're providing me a detailed payroll report by employee, and I can see that that withdrawal happened each month or whatever the payroll frequency was. And it just makes it really nice and easy. I don't have to question anything. I don't have to go back to anybody and say, I need more documentation on this. It makes the process much quicker, and it makes you much more likely to receive forgiveness the first go around if you're providing all that documentation up front. And no matter what, I would always be prepared to provide your bank statements. I have had some people block out other transactions, which can be a huge pain, but that's one of the reasons why we recommend just opening up a completely separate bank account to keep all of your information in, so that you can provide the bank statement for that bank account. It's all PPP related, and the SBA or anybody else doesn't have any access to how you spend your other funds. So that's kind of the end of the presentation. You can feel free to follow up with me if you have any questions. My email address is there, or you can connect with me on LinkedIn. On our website at prestambosloans.org/PPP/forgiveness. We also have a lot of documentation. We've got different types of webinars, so you're free to look at that and get some more information there as things change if you need some more documentation. But other than that, we can go into Q&A session.
Amber, can you see those Q&A questions?
I can, so I just click answer live here.
Yep.
Okay, so Monica's asking, if all the loan funds are used in 10 weeks, what time period do you use to calculate your costs? You would do it over, well, first of all, the loan term is going to be the loan term. So your loan term is a fixed period of time based on whether you're 8 weeks or 10 weeks. But if you use all the funds in 10 weeks, you're just going to provide the documentation showing how you use the funds. You don't have to go the whole time period. You don't have to go the full 24 weeks. As soon as the funds are expended, you just want to provide all of the documentation on how you spent those funds. Would you please provide the taxes that are forgivable again? Yes, so any employee portion, so their gross wages, where they would have their federal taxes and their Social Security and their Medicare withheld, you're fine to use their full gross wages. And then you can also pay for Arizona unemployment. The things that you cannot use are the employer portion of Social Security, Medicare, and federal unemployment. So those three are not eligible uses. You also can't do workers' comp or any other kind of insurances. It's just the gross wages and the state unemployment. Do offices within a home utilities expenses count towards PPP forgiveness? Yes, they do. So you would prorate it based on the square footage usage. So again, you would take, if your home office was 100 square feet and your total home was 1,000 square feet, you're using 10% of your home for your business. So that means that you can use 10% of your utilities, your mortgage, any of those eligible expenses. So yes, now if you have a separate phone line for your business or a separate internet, and make sure that it's a separate contract, that you're not trying to cut corners and count it all, then those are, if it's specifically for your business, then that is eligible. You don't have to prorate it. Surprise, COVID cleaning isn't eligible. I'm right there with you, but unfortunately that's the way that it is, and this isn't a program that has any kind of flexibility whatsoever. It's very specific, and it is the way that it is. Assuming you apply for forgiveness in week 12, are there requirements to keep staff and salaries at a certain level between weeks 12 through 14? So your requirement is at some point during your loan term to bring your head count back up to that FTE equivalent of one of those 2 previous periods. So you would need to bring all the employees back during your loan term. You don't have to keep them the entire time. You just have to bring them back at one point. For some businesses, they're not going to be able to sustain bringing all of their employees back for that long. The PPP has been incredibly helpful for businesses to be able to bring back their employees, even if they're not operating at full capacity. But again, the PPP loan is only based on 2.5 months, and we're talking about 6 months. Okay. The max calculation of $15K in an 8-week period is a calculation of biweekly payroll. Can we use a calculation of 100,000 divided by 24 to come up with a per payroll max? It's slightly different, but with 50 employees, it's a bigger number. Okay. So what I would say is that you want to be consistent with whatever you've done in the past. First of all, that's the most important thing, is that there's consistency. If you're doing biweekly payroll and you have employees that exceed $100,000 per year, remember that you can't ever exceed that 15,385, I believe it is. And I would think that you would want to do 15,385 divided by 8 or divided by 4 for your biweekly, as opposed to using 100,024, because the number doesn't come out exactly the same. So I hope that answered your question.
And Amber, on that one, the biweekly payroll is not 100,000 divided by 24. There's 26 weeks in a biweekly payroll, and that forgiveness amount for the 8 weeks or the 24 weeks is based off the 100,000 divided by 52 weeks of the year to get that weekly amount that's forgivable. And then you can add it for 2 weeks for the biweekly or however you do that, but it can be a little confusing on that math. So if you need more clarification, you can reach out to Emma or myself.
Yeah, just make sure that you don't exceed that 15,385, and I would use that number as the number you're using to divide, and you can do it by 4, or you could do weekly, however you're going to do it. Just don't exceed that 15,385 in that 8-week period, or extend it out over the 24-week period so that you have the ability to pay at a little bit higher, but you can't exceed the equivalency of $100,000 per year per employee, which is going to be that $20,833. Okay, what about multiple leases? We have a corporate apartment for leadership and travelers to use, as well as an office lease. Can I submit both? That's a really good question about the corporate apartment. I haven't had that question before. I don't know the answer to that question, Paula. So if you want to email me directly about it, I can do a little bit of digging for you. If you do have multiple buildings, multiple leases, you can submit, your multiple rent payments. This is a little bit different because it's for housing, which actually housing, like in, some churches that we've worked with that pay for housing, that's been an eligible use. So I would say actually, yeah, this actually is an eligible use under the payroll because it's a benefit for the employees. But still email me. I'll look for the specific statute on this. But again, if you do have multiple buildings that you rent, either you own them or you're leasing them, you can submit eligible leases. Just remember that you can't exceed 40% of the total loan. 60% has to be used for payroll in order to maximize that forgiveness and get 100%. Okay. So this question is around the interpretations that have changed over the course of the loan. For this particular question, Sue, regarding how you should record it for your GL, what I would recommend that you reach out to your accountant or bookkeeper to figure out the best way, because this could impact your taxes as well. The way that it works is that if you incurred or you paid your expenses during your loan term, so for example, if you had a previous payroll that hadn't been paid yet, and then you get your funding into your bank account, and then a day later or 2 days later, that payroll comes out, it's considered paid. And then if you're at the end of the pay period, and during that pay period, your employees work the 2 weeks, but you're not paying them their payroll until after the end of your loan term, that also counts because it's considered incurred. So if you paid it or you incurred it during your loan term, both of those are eligible expenses. And they're also eligible for forgiveness, but remember that they also cannot be used as a deduction on your taxes. So I would talk to your accountant specifically about this question. Debbie's asking, can you explain the 40-60% a bit more? Expenses up to 40% and payroll up to 60%, so I can get 100% forgiveness if I meet these two. So there's a couple of conditions in order to meet 100% forgiveness. The first is that if you're a W2 employer, that you use at least 60% of your funds for payroll. You can use up to 100% and that's completely fine, but you have to use 60% in order to get full forgiveness in this category. You also have to have your FTE equivalency. So you have to bring your employment numbers back up to where they were in one of the 2 look back periods. And you also have to maintain 75% payroll per employee. So those are the 3 qualifiers. And then assuming that you do use that 40%, you need to make sure that those are eligible expenses. So the rent or lease, the eligible utilities, or interest on fixed loans. You can't use it for anything else and still claim for forgiveness. So again, you have to use, if you're a W2 employer, you have to use 60% or more for payroll for W2 wages, retirement, or the unemployment taxes or group health benefits. And the other 40% you can use for eligible expenses. If you are self-employed, it's different because you're automatically getting that owner compensation replacement. You would just want to make sure that you're paying yourself in the draws. Okay, so our 30 hours per week employees FTE, the SBA has come out with a requirement that 40 hours is considered the FTE equivalency. So you would want to take all of your part-time employees and add up the total amount of hours that they work per week, divide it by 40, and that gets your FTE. So you would do that for the previous periods, and you would do it for this period now. So if you kept the same number of employees working 30 hours per week that you had in the past, your FTE numbers are going to be the same. It just isn't considered a full FTE because it's not the full 40 hours. I noticed that a PPP loan is already accruing interest. Is interest on PPP loan also forgivable or still due? So at this point, you shouldn't be accruing any kind of interest because there's a 10-month deferral. So what happens is you have your loan term, and then you would apply for forgiveness, and you would get the information about your forgiveness back, and you would still have a deferral period before those funds would become due. If your loan is forgiven, you won't have to pay any interest. You won't have to pay any kind of payments at all if you're 100% forgiven. It might just be whatever software that your lender has. It might be just might be a glitch within their system. I know that our amortizations schedules look a little bit weird, but they'll get redone once the forgiveness is determined, because right now nobody knows if you're getting forgiveness or not. So that'll be something that in the future, once you've officially received your information about forgiveness, that you'll want to look into at that point.
Hey, Amber, I want to jump over to two questions that are in the chat.
Sure.
Quick one is, if the government is still talking about making loans under X dollars fully forgivable, why would we apply for forgiveness now and not wait for that?
I would say if you want to wait, then that's probably a good choice to spare yourself the headache of uploading everything, and keep watch. Again, you do have 10 months to apply for forgiveness. I just know that some people just want to get this out of the way. They've been dealing with it for a while and they just want to get it off their plate. Other people know that they procrastinate, and they know that if they don't apply for it right now, they might miss the deadline. But there's no disadvantage to you waiting to find out about that blanket forgiveness.
One of the things with that too, Amber, that I remember reading and being from the SBA is, if there is blanket forgiveness, the loans are still subject to being audited. So you will want to have all the same information saved somewhere. So should you be audited within the next few years for the loan, that you have the documentation to show it was used properly.
Yeah, that's a really great point. We've definitely had conversations where the SBA said that they will do random audits and that they won't have any kind of threshold. In the past, they had higher thresholds where they wouldn't audit an account. So even if you got under $1,000 for your PPP loan, you have the potential of being audited, and you need to retain your documentation for at least 3 years. Or even if you have a 5-year term, I guess if you end up getting forgiven, you won't have to have a loan term. So that doesn't make sense. But
and then another one that ties in with that in the application period is, when will the portal be open to file your paperwork on forgiveness?
So that is going to be by lender. Your lender is going to have to open up whatever their forgiveness process is with you. So you'll have to speak with them directly. I know for us, some people have already been invited, and then others, if you just reach out and say, I'd like to start applying for forgiveness, then we individually open up the portal. So that's going to be a very lender specific. And then today, the SBA actually opened up their ability for a lender to submit the documentation for forgiveness. So up until this point, even if you applied for forgiveness and you were approved for forgiveness, your lender hasn't been able to send it off to the SBA. So as of today, that has changed.
Okay. We go back to the Q&A.
Okay. Our company was funded on 5/5. We have one employee who terminated on 8/7 by choice. Are we required to hire a replacement for this individual? The work we do is very specialized and it's difficult to replace. So this falls under the safe harbor. Your employee left by choice, that's not your doing. So you just want to make sure that you keep the documentation. Hopefully you had some kind of exit interview where they submitted a resignation letter. And if it's difficult for you to hire a similarly qualified individual within your loan term, you just want to put the documentation on that together and make sure you provide it to your lender. That can even be a written statement that, you know, we've put out an ad, but we're very specialized. We haven't had any qualified applicants and we've been unable to hire. And that's understandable under these circumstances with COVID as well. There's, you know, the issue with unemployment, and a lot of small businesses are having difficulty getting the staffing that they needed because people are able to collect unemployment. They don't feel comfortable coming back home. Maybe they're sick, or maybe they have a vulnerable family member and they just don't feel comfortable with it. So there's a lot of reasons why it's difficult to bring your FTE count back up, but just keep the proper documentation that they left by choice and that you've attempted to rehire and you have been unable to do so, and you'll fall under the safe harbor. Regarding the FTE calculation, you only have to meet one of the two safe harbor scenarios, correct? Yes, you only have to meet one of the safe harbors. Either you were unable to operate at full capacity, or you were unable to bring people back because they decided not to come back, or you couldn't hire similarly qualified. And again, just make sure you keep the documentation, but you don't have to meet both. Employer portion of only medical, or can it be for dental, vision, life, and disability? Those are all employee benefits. So as long as it's the employer portion that you're paying on behalf of your employees, then that can be considered a usable and forgivable expense. If I'm a sole proprietor and have W-2 employees, can I count my DB, 401k, profit sharing? As a self-employed individual, you are not able to use any kind of your benefits for you as part of the forgiveness, only your employees. My loan funded May 7th. Can I select 24 weeks? And does 24 weeks start from May 7th? That's correct. If you were funded prior to June 5th, you are eligible to select either 8-week or 24-week. It's up to you which you choose. And the 24 weeks or the 8-week period starts from the date the funds hit your account. So May 7th would be the start date of your loan term. If you're an S Corp and you pay yourself W-2, but you also receive a K-1, you're only going to use your W-2 wages. You cannot include your K-1 as an S Corp. It's only your W-2 wages. The K-1 is only for the 1065 partnerships. I just kind of answered this, but if funds were received prior to June 5th, the business can do either 8-week or 24-week. That's up to you. If it's funded after June 5th, you can only use the 24-week. You cannot use the 8-week. Are expenses for tradespeople, not 1099, count for forgiveness? For example, the person who does your marketing or paying a tech person, if they're not a W-2 employee, then they do not count as part of W-2 wages. So you have to be paying them as a W-2 employee. So if they're somebody that, I think maybe you're talking about maybe a company, that doesn't count. It has to be W-2 employees to count for the payroll. Is the employer match on a simple IRA account considered forgivable retirement plan? If this is individualized, because I don't think typically you would have a 401k type program. If you want to email me about this one, we can talk a little bit more in detail so that I can ask you a couple more questions. But if your employee has their own IRA and you don't have a 401k program and you're contributing on their behalf as the employer, It would make sense because it's a standard benefit if you've been paying it. I don't know the specific answer on this, so please reach out to me and I'll do a little digging and get you a more specific answer. This is a little outside the typical guidelines. What is the reason on why businesses that hire or pay 1099 contractors cannot include their pay for forgiveness? It's because that 1099 contractor is also self-employed and they're eligible, or they were eligible for a PPP loan on their own. So that means that they could have applied and gotten their own PPP loan. They're not considered an employee. They're a separate person. And you also might want to talk to your tax preparer or your accountant to make sure that you are paying people that work for you correctly, because a contractor is its own separate entity. It shouldn't be considered or have any kind of employment type relationship. And if you do have that relationship, you might want to consider changing them from a 1099 contractor to a W2 employee. What's the impact of layoffs on PPP and EIDL loans? What happens if we have to lay people off because the funds are not available? So I'm not sure if you mean you ran out or you just weren't eligible for the program. Robert, do you know what she's asking here specifically? I'm kind of not sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, if you have a PPP loan, you know, the forgiveness could be impacted if you lay off additional people during that loan period. EIDL loans are designed to help cover operating expenses, not just payroll, but they're also designed to cover operating expenses. And the EIDL loan is not a forgivable loan. There is a advance portion that does not have to be repaid, but the EIDL loan itself is not a forgivable loan. So
correct. Maybe they mean if
oh, sorry. I don't know if you have additional time to answer some of these, or if you have, I believe you said you had another meeting here.
Yeah, I can do a couple more.
Okay.
Okay. Can you clarify when our application for forgiveness is due? So it's due 10 months after the end of your forgiveness period. So you want to take whenever your loan was funded into your bank account in either the 8-week or 24-week period. And when that period is up, you have 10 months from the end of your loan period to apply for forgiveness. Okay, so this question is around bringing people back. You are eligible under the safe harbor to bring your FTE back up by December 31st, 2020. So I would wait on any kind of forgiveness until you're able to start bringing your employees back. Because if you apply for forgiveness right now and you don't have your FTE, then you're not going to be able to get full eligibility for your forgiveness. I would wait until you're able to bring employees back in order to apply for forgiveness.
Hey, Amber, I think this is also a good time with this question. They're not able to bring people back yet. With the PPP loan, a recommendation is that you also do what's right for your business. So if doing what's right for your business doesn't get you the full forgiveness, it's still only a 1% interest rate on a loan. So it's a really low cost of money on the loan. So just remember to do what's right for your business, do what you need to do for your business to keep it alive, to help it survive, as opposed to spending every effort to try to get forgiveness and then maybe not having that cash that you need a little bit further down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't recommend bringing people just to bring them back so you can maximize your forgiveness if it doesn't make sense. Also, if you don't need to use the funds for your business because you don't have those expenditures, you can also pay it back when you go to apply for forgiveness. Or as Robert said, it's a short-term loan, but it is at 1%. And if it makes sense to keep your business afloat, it's not the intent of the program, but do what's best for your business. If FTE was reduced for cause, do we still need to return to pre-PPP employment numbers? That falls under the safe harbor, so you just want to provide documentation showing that they were terminated for cause. So I would use whatever your normal human resources exit interview or whatever your process was, and just provide a copy of that information when you apply for forgiveness. Okay, so the $2,000 EIDL. So anybody that got an EIDL advance, when you apply for forgiveness, the application asks if you received an EIDL advance, and you put that information. That EIDL advance doesn't have to be paid back under the EIDL program, but it will be removed from the amount of forgiveness that you're eligible for, so you will end up having to pay that back. Okay. Monica's clarifying her question. Okay, so again, the thing is that you originally were going to do the 8-week plan. Now you're switching to the 24-week plan. Your loan term is still 24 weeks. So that's still the term that you're going to use, even if you want to apply for forgiveness earlier. So the time period is going to be your loan period. So you still would use your full 24 weeks as your loan period. You can apply for forgiveness earlier than the end of your loan term though. So you would just use the time period to determine your payroll cost as your loan term of the 24 weeks. If you bring people back, they need to be brought back at the full-time equivalency of what you were previously had them on for. So your FTE needs to be equal to what it was in either February through June of 2019 or January 1st through February 29th of 2020. It needs to be that same FTE. So again, if it's a part-time person, you would take the total amount of hours that they work per week and divide it by 40, and that would give you their FTE, and that's what you need to keep them at in order to maintain forgiveness, 100% forgiveness. If you do bring them back and they work reduced hours, you'll still be eligible for forgiveness. It'll just be less than 100% for forgiveness for that employee's portion. Or the safe harbor that talks about being unable to bring people back. That's the other option, is that you qualify under that safe harbor. So depending on what kind of business you have, if you're unable to operate at full capacity because of any kind of state or health department regulations, then that helps mitigate that, and that's that safe harbor. So, if you're a gym, you were able to bring people back for a short period of time, maybe at reduced hours, and then you shut down. Or if you're a restaurant and you're only able to operate at 50% capacity for safety, and that's a safety regulation, then you fall under the safe harbor, and that won't impact your FTE forgiveness eligibility. I'm self-employed, sole proprietor. Can you pay yourself retroactively? I received my PPP in July, but work reduction started in March. Can I pay myself in weeks before the PPP loan came through to claim these? If you're a sole proprietor, you're eligible for your compensation replacement, and you're able to take that 2.5. So you can pay yourself in draws, and you don't have to justify when it was for. You're just eligible to take those draws. So I would say yes, you're able to pay retroactively because you're just eligible as a self-employed individual for 2.5 times your average monthly payroll. Is there any information available as to whether the forgiveness loans will be taxable income and if the associated expenses will be deductible? So the answer to both is no. The forgivable loan will not be taxable income, but you also cannot use the forgiven expenses as a tax deduction at the end of the year. So you'll want to talk with whoever prepares your taxes, your CPA, your accountant, to strategize around how that might impact your net profit at the end of the year. But no, you won't include it as income, and you won't include the expenses that you used as part of forgiveness.
Hey, Amber, we're going to need to go ahead and wrap up. I know there's a number of questions still out there. So attendees that still have questions and we won't really get to them, We apologize for that. You can please feel free to reach out to Amber. She has her email listed right there on the screen, or you can reach out to me through the ACA. Give us a call or shoot me an email. My information's on our website. But we want to thank Amber for today's presentation. It was excellent. Amber, as always, thank you very much for putting this together and sharing this information with us.
My pleasure.
We will be having another PPP session on Monday, August 24th. That session will be with Carrie Ann Todd from Beach Fleischman. She's also been one of our PPP presenters throughout the last few months. Been very helpful with that. So if you have continued questions, feel free to join us for that session. Again, that'll be Monday, August 24th at 9 a.m. Just a quick reminder that we will be back tomorrow morning with our boot camp session on our regular Tuesday session. So please join us. You can register for that at the website that is listed. We listed it in the chat. We can also find a recording for this session at that same website. It will be posted later on today along with this slide deck. So again, Amber, thank you very much for today's session. Thank you for spending that extra time to answer those questions that the attendees had. And we look forward to seeing everybody tomorrow. Have a great day.
Bye. Thank you.